For many years, the movie industry has been influenced by comic books. With the likes of giant entities such as Marvel and DC, it's easy to get lost in the larger than life characters that they've developed over time. But what about the independent comics? Why does it seem as if they don't exist? Believe it or not, some of the more intriguing comic book movies that are at the grasp of your fingertips are made from independent comics. Today, we take a deep dive into the world of comic book movies, but not only that, the ones we often overlook. Not the Captain Americas, not the Bruce Waynes, not even your friendly neighborhood Spider-Mans. Tonight, we have a discussion of sorts on the independent circuit of comic book films and why they have their own place in the world of cinema. This is a Comic Talkers production, and you are listening to Just for Flicks. What's going on, guys? It's your boy, Patty B. With me today, as always, is Mr. B-Dog, Mr. Brandon. How are we doing tonight, man?
I'm doing good. This is a conversation I love to bring up because for anybody who does not know, you hear in the beginning of all the podcasts, this is a Comic Talk production. We have a podcast called Comic Talkers where comics is always the top of our discussion. And we always bring up independent comic book companies. We bring up Image, Dark Horse, Boom Studios, all these other big players that people tend to forget about when it comes to the world of comic books because you have two big honchos out there, Marvel and DC.
Yep.
And independence, I've explored more independence since the podcast began, especially with our co-hosts Mary and Bryce, who have introduced me to many independent comic books, and I've enjoyed them. And I think this is something that I've always been curious about, that we have had some, and we have great shows from independent comics. But to us, why do we not see more up on the big screen? Mm-hmm. So it's something that I'm actually kind of excited to get into when we talked about doing this. So yeah. So Pat, let me ask you this. What's your experience with some of the independent comic book films that you see?
Well, I gotta say, it's like when I was going down the list of all the independent comic book movies that are out there, I guess for me, I didn't realize that there were comic book movies,
Mm-hmm.
Such as, The Mask, Men in Black. I know there's a few shows out there that I didn't realize. It's just it's intriguing, and I know we'll get into it, but it's just, I think the wide variety of films that the independent comics have to offer, I think, is a cool thing. It's not your everyday superhero gimmick type things, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm just saying that I think sometimes we need to get away from the whole superhero image.
Right.
So,
and we have had independent comic book companies early on in years, but really the first big ones to come out was in the early 90s with Image Comics. Image Comics split off with 5 artists and writers from Marvel, Rob Liefeld, Todd McFarlane, Jim Lee, and a couple others, and they went to go make their own company. That's where we get characters like Spawn. This is where we get Robert Kirkman's Invincible and Walking Dead. There's a lot in this, and really independent comic books, really, in my eyes, are picking up more in the 90s, early 2000s, and nowadays you see a lot. Yeah. And branching out, and I know we've talked about this even before the podcast, independent comic books allow us to not just have to look at superheroes. We don't have to look at the eyes of a superhero in every comic book we read. Sometimes it's a horror story that we thought we never liked. I'll be honest, I prefer horror comics than I prefer watching movies about horror.
Yep.
You have comic books that do deal with superheroes, but like Invincible or Kick-Ass is another one.
One of my favorites.
But Invincible also explores the psychology of a superhero and a villain. It does really do well that way. The Mask, which is more funny, more of an anti-hero story, something that you would never see in comic books. You also have Sin City is another big independent comic book. Sin City.
One that threw me off too as you're going down the list is Wanted. I never really I remember watching that as a kid, and I loved that movie just because I love the action aspect of it and everything. And I just never realized it was a comic book movie.
Let's talk about Wanted, because this is one of them I had in my notes here. Wanted was released in 2008 with Angelina Jolie, James McAvoy,
Yeah,
Morgan Freeman and Terrence Stamp, and there's many actors in it too. The budget for this film was $75 million. Gross worldwide was 342,463,063. So it pretty much like doubled, pretty much tripled what they budgeted for.
I remember it had a lot. I remember as a kid, I remember it had a lot of promotional stuff to it. Like it had a lot of marketing involved in the film itself.
It
Um, yeah,
Wanted was also nominated for 2 Oscars:
that's crazy.
sound mixing and sound editing.
Okay.
So, and they didn't win any of them,
Uh-huh.
but it was nominated for it. So,
Isn't Chris, I believe a young Chris Pratt is in that movie, if
yes,
I'm not
he
mistaken.
is. Chris
Yeah.
Pratt.
You know what's funny is
He's the guy that works with James McAvoy. Remember?
and he's screwing his girlfriend, I believe. Yeah, so one thing that sticks out in my mind of that movie is when he finds all that out and he hits him in the face with the keyboard, and then all the letters from the keyboard are flying and it says "fuck you." I was like, so and it's funny because there's like certain parts of that movie now that I think about on it, knowing that it's a comic book movie, and it's like, wow, the way it's done and the certain scenes that are involved within the film, it kind of encapsulates that comic book feel, if you know what I mean. You know what I mean? Like just certain things about it. Kind of like how Kick-Ass does in certain things. I mean, but Kick-Ass is supposed to be, that superhero movie.
Well, let's talk about Kick-Ass. That was the next one I have on my list. Stars Aaron Taylor Johnson, Nicolas Cage, Chloe Grace Moretz, Mark Strong. Budget was $30 million. 2 years after Wanted. This is also another Mark Millar film or comic.
Okay.
It grossed $96 million.
Damn, tripled.
And this is, again, look at the budget. Budget
Yeah.
was $30 million. And you have actors like Mark Strong and Nicolas Cage.
Nicolas Cage, yeah. Now this was kind of a weird period for Nicolas Cage, I feel like, too.
This is kind of his start of his downfall a little bit more.
Downfall. I feel like lately he's kind of gone back up.
Oh, yeah.
But
Since I would say there was a movie, I think, right before Into the Spider-Verse that kind of put him back on the map. And then he had Into the Spider-Verse with Spider-Man Noir. But yes, Kick-Ass is another. But again, this was a superhero film that goes beyond the whole superhero aspect, if that makes sense. Like,
yeah,
not your, oh, I'm here to save the day. No, it's more that humorous, I'm going to beat you up, very prolific, very violent.
yeah.
It's a very different. That's why I like independent superhero comics too, because they take that and go beyond.
Yeah, you're not seeing that with a typical Marvel, right? You're not going to see that in your typical Captain America movie where
like you might see it with somebody like Batman, or you might see it with some darker characters.
you're not going to see someone get their brains exploded, getting shot in the head or something like that. Like that's what I liked about Kick-Ass so much is how violent it was. And I know it's just, that's kind of, and like what you're saying too, it's some people look for that in a comic book movie, I feel like, that extra sense of violence.
One of my favorite scenes to this day in the first one is when he gets the pig tissue put in him first, and his friends are like, "Oh, let's go test it out," and they kept on testing. He goes, "Oh, okay," and the kid picks up the tray and just smacks him right in the. And it makes me laugh every time it comes on screen. Or the first time Kick-Ass and Red Mist meet each other for the first time.
Yeah.
Or what was it when the Hit Girl and Kick-Ass are in the building of Mark Strong's character, and he sits there, he goes, and the guy comes in as like his number one like henchman, and he goes, "I'm getting the bazooka." Wait a minute, you're getting a bazooka? You're gonna kill us all. Do it. He sits there and shoot him.
This was my first movie that kind of introduced me to Aaron Taylor Johnson as well. I think other than Savages, but I think this was before Savages, if I'm not mistaken.
I don't know. I think this
When did Kick-Ass come out?
2010.
Yeah, Savages was 2012.
Okay, so after.
Yeah. So Kick-Ass was before Savages, but yeah, this and Savages is what kind of introduced me to him, and now we've seen
He's
how
played
good
in a lot of movies, and he plays Quicksilver in Age of Ultron. He plays in Bullet Train. I
I was gonna
like
say Bullet Train's fantastic.
I like him more as a side character. But let's go to another one that a lot of people forget is a comic book film. Now, this one did not make all its money back, but it was very popular and it's a cult classic. Scott Pilgrim versus the World.
Mhm.
This budget was 60 million and the gross worldwide was 51,691,156.
Not a terrible loss, but a loss still. I mean,
But you got to
but
remember, some of these actors were newer. So you got
yeah,
to
I
remember
think
Michael.
Michael Cera's the main character,
Yeah,
isn't he?
and he was young in this. This is before, I believe this is either right before or
This is
after Superbad.
this is after Superbad, I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure.
This
I'm
was a
not
young Mary Elizabeth Winstead. This was a very young Audrey Plaza. This had Brie Larson in it, a very young version of her. The only
Aubrey Plaza's in that movie. I didn't even think about that.
Mhm. The only big name actors I remember from this film, Jason Schwartzman.
Okay.
But again, not a big name actor, but he's there.
He was established with being involved in all of Wes Anderson stuff
I
and
bel-
doing other projects as well.
and then I believe, if I'm not mistaken, was Chris Evans in this film?
I don't know, man. If I'm being honest with you, I've only seen this movie probably like twice. Um,
So yes, Chris Evans is. I just looked it up. He is one of the ex-boyfriends. And then
okay.
I have another one I was going to look up.
Isn't Jason Schwartzman like the main bad guy?
Yes, he is one of the main bad boyfriends. And then Brandon Routh is in this film, which again, everybody's like, "Who the hell is that?" But Scott Pilgrim is one that always tends to be forgotten, and it is a comic book film. And
Yeah.
now it's become such a cult classic. There's even a show about it now with the
Mhm.
same actors returning.
Mhm.
This is how popular this movie was. It might have not grossed back everything, but it's a point that, you know what, or didn't make a profit, but it's still a cult classic.
Yeah.
The difference is that Scott Pilgrim is who it was published by as well. I think also added to the issue. I believe it
Mhm.
was Oni Press. Oni Press was not really big during that time frame. You had some comic books coming from them, but you didn't have tons. Scott Pilgrim was like their big one. This was
Yeah.
like their first big stint. And like they are known for franchise too. I believe they had Sonic, they had a couple other things, but this was like their first big creation. And it was okay. It's still a cult classic. I watch it still to this day. It's that good. Probably one of the only Jason Schwartzman films I can actually sit there and watch and go, he plays decent, other than Across the Spider Verse and Rushmore. Simple.
I would recommend, and it's kind of a hard watch for some people, but it's good. You should watch Spun.
I think I have. I can't remember. It's been a long time.
It's dark and not for children at all. So you should definitely watch it though. It's good.
Now,
Anyway.
I want to talk about this next one. This is one you've already brought up that you went down the list and didn't know it was a comic. Now, the only reason I'm bringing this up is because when you really look at what the comic's based around compared to what the movie is, it's total opposites, but they deal with the same thing, the
Mhm.
Mask.
Yeah.
The Mask has Jim Carrey and was the first movie of Cameron Diaz's career.
Hmm.
The
Yeah,
budget,
it's young Cameron Diaz.
you want to take a shot at what the budget was?
I want to say it's low.
It was very low. It's still in the millions, but it's low,
Like under 20 million,
a little higher,
27,
lower.
23.
You got it. 23 million. Third time's a charm. Um, the gross,
We could have stayed here all night until I got.
yeah, gross worldwide was pretty much rough it up, 352 million.
Damn, killed it.
This is a movie I love The Mask. I love Jim Carrey in this film.
Love it. I love.
But when you really read the comic, it is totally different.
Well, I was looking at pictures from the comics and I'm like, dude, this thing looks dark. Like it
It's
looks
a very dark comic.
very, very dark.
He's
Like
an
it ain't,
anti-hero in the comics.
it
That's
doesn't seem as bubbly the way the movie portrays the
Like
character.
he's a funny character. Don't get
Oh,
me wrong.
somebody stop me. Yeah.
Even in the comics, he is very funny, but he's very dark. And to
Yeah.
have that, it's like Jim Carrey was good for the comedical aspect, but to take on that little darker role, I'm glad they went comedical more in the movie because I don't think Jim Carrey would have pulled it off if it was darker. Um, but again, this was a movie that really only had those two big names. You had a couple other people here and there, but not as big as those two names right there.
Yeah.
And
Uh, so are you saying that in the comics they don't call him Arumba Pete?
that I don't. It's been a while since I've read it.
I'm not being no
Um,
Kenobi.
But the mask is very what I've read of it and remember of it. It's very dark. It's
Cuban Pete. That's what I got it wrong. Sorry, folks.
yeah.
They call
So
me Cuban Pete.
but that's what I said. There's still humor in it, but it's like dark humor.
Yeah.
So so okay. It shows that it's successful, right? Let's talk about the big ones, Hellboy and Hellboy 2.
Yeah.
Okay, Hellboy came out in 2004, stars Ron Perlman, Doug Jones, Selma Blair, John Hurt. Budget was 66 million, gross worldwide 99, about near 100 million for it. Not terrible. Hellboy 2, this is where the difference comes in. The only difference, some of the main differences with the cast, Seth MacFarlane plays in this movie, or voices this movie. He is Hans, or Krauts. He's the robot with the ghost inside him. Okay. Budget was 85 mil. And they grossed 168, roughly up to 169 mil. These are perfect movies. I actually love this. This is another way of showing that writers of a comic can actually have say.
Mm-hmm.
Mike Mignola, who is the creator of Hellboy, actually had a lot of say in this, and it helped it. Ron Perlman is perfect for this role. He is born to play this role. And I really love it. Every time he's on screen, he's a funny character. It's dark, but not to the point where it's not unwatchable. It's fun humor. I love Doug Jones. Anytime he's on screen, I love any role he's in. And Selma Blair's, this is probably one of my only favorite movies of hers, is both these right here. I'm not a big Selma Blair fan. And she does really good in these films.
Mm-hmm.
But what was your opinions on Hellboys? Like,
So the Hellboy movies, if I'm being quite frank, I'm not too familiar with them. I know I watched the first one when I was a kid,
Mhm.
which might have been kind of a darker movie to watch as a kid. I
Mhm.
just remember loving the visual look of Hellboy himself. I've always been a big Ron Perlman fan. Ever since, I used to watch the Beauty and the Beast show when I was a kid with my aunt. I know that's a random throw out.
Yeah.
That's with him and Linda Hamilton from Terminator.
Okay.
Uh, have you ever seen that show? You've
No.
never seen? Oh, dude, there was a show like in the I want to say late 80s, early 90s called Beauty. It was Beauty and the Beast, but it was he's the Beast and Linda Hamilton's the girl. Crazy, right?
Never
You
seen.
gotta
I
go
don't
check
know
it
if I
out.
want to. I don't know if I want to be
Oh,
ruined.
it's wild. Very 90s, bro.
I don't
Very.
know if I want to ruin Ron Perlman and Linda Hamilton for me. I'm
Oh,
sorry.
dude, you have to check it out. No, but from what I remember of the movie, I enjoyed it, but I also think I was too young to really appreciate what it was about and what the characters are trying to get over. Um, yeah.
This was actually so. Other than Spider-Man, this was actually one of my very first comic book films. Was Hellboy,
Hmm.
and I remember watching with my mom. I was about 9, 10 when it came out, and I really enjoyed it. I don't. I'm usually was never the kid that liked satanic films, anything with horror, anything. And I was scared when I first came in, but I came out enjoying the movie. It was
Yeah.
fun, entertaining. A demon's a Catholic in this film. How can you not like that? He has an obsession with cats for some reason. It's funny to watch. John Hurt, amazing in this film. I really love
Yeah.
John in this film. But it's really good. In Golden Army, I think it gets a lot of crap, but look at the numbers alone.
Hmm.
It doubled what it made, or yeah, pretty much almost doubled what it made, or what it was out to make, right? And the second one more than first one. The first one just made about 30,000 or $30 million more than what the budget was,
Hmm.
and they didn't really get that much of a increase. It was like 19 million that they got extra. That was about it to make the second one, and the second one's really good. I don't mind it. Don't watch the 2019 one because that's a box office flop and it's terrible. Terrible. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's go to two more. 30 Days a Night. I'm not going to go too far into this one. But 30 Days a Night, a lot of people forget, is a comic book. Josh Hartnett, Melissa George, Danny Houston, and Ben Foster were some of the main actors in this. Budget was 30 million, gross worldwide, about 76 million. Not terrible. Now here's your big one, Men in Black.
One of my favorites.
Will Smith, Linda Fiorentino, Vincent D'Onofrio, Rip Torn.
And that's an air cell comic too, isn't it? Yeah.
Now, budget for this was 90 million. They grossed worldwide about $590 million.
Crazy.
This is the highest one on our list. And why we brought these numbers up is I feel it shows that these movies can play a picture in the comic book realm and in the cinema, in theaters. We see that they are successful. Now, there are a lot of flops, and Hellboy, that's the newest one, sucked. Let's see.
Is the newest one doesn't have Ron Perlman, right?
Oh, it has the dude from Stranger Things, which
Oh, David Harbour, I believe his name is, right? Something like that.
yes. Now there are other ones that are on here, like Ghost World. A lot of people forget it's based off a comic with Scarlett Johansson. Dread is another big one.
Dread.
300, but that's also kind of in that realm of Sin City, The Crow.
Yeah.
The Crow is a cult classic. Like,
I watched 20 minutes and I could not get into it.
you need to give it a chance. Kingsman is another big
Give it a 20-minute chance.
Well, you need to watch the whole movie. Once you get into I think you would say past the 30-minute mark, you
When
would.
it comes to films, Brandon, if I'm not intrigued by looking at it, I will give it the 15 to 20-minute rule. If it does not excite me after that fact,
Well, I'm gonna
done.
veto your thing and tell you to watch it because it is a cult classic for a reason.
Okay.
And it's not because, and it's, Art, rest in peace. This was Brandon Lee's last film because he was shot on set, but it's a really good movie.
Yeah.
They're remaking it with Skarsgård in it.
I'm kind of intrigued to see how that is. Just because
Okay, then I'm going to challenge you. If you can't go watch the old movie with him in it, if you can't go back and watch the 1994 version of it with Brandon Lee,
yeah.
you probably will get past Skarsgård's version.
I'm intrigued because with what Bill Skarsgård was able to do with the It character with Pennywise, kind of bring a whole different life to him and a completely different appearance.
Yes.
I feel like, the sky's the limit with that guy. So, I mean, I would definitely be down to try his rendition. I guess I'll go ahead and watch the other one just out of respect for Brandon Lee. But like I said, it wasn't clicking with me when I watched it at first. So maybe I should give it another try.
Another bad one that people put out there, and I'm gonna say it's a guilty pleasure of mine, but I understand why people hate it. It's League of Ordinary Jump.
So the game is.
Roll the coin. Now, this is another independent comic book. I want to say it was Image. I can't remember, but it is Alan Moore who wrote it.
Mm.
It's one of those stories like the comic books. There are diehard fans in it. I'm one of them that go, that's not my scene, but I will read it. And it's really weird, but I really do enjoy it. Now, not only has independent comic books been a part of the main cinema, they've actually been some great shows. The Walking Dead is the first big one to come to mind. The Walking Dead, written by Robert Kirkman, has been on AMC for years and it spawned many other series off it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what's your take on The Walking Dead? What's talking about?
When it came out, I was a freshman in high school when it came out, and I loved it. And I tried to give it after about season 2 or 3. I really tried to give it another try. I think just for me, John Barenthal's character as Shane in that show really held that show together. I'm not saying the seasons afterwards were terrible, but just for me alone, like the way that character development was with him, and the way that the group evolved around him, and then when they found Rick and everything, it just there was just a different level of drama to that show. And I think after that, for me, it just kind of dissipated a little bit. So I kind of lost interest in it over time. I know I kind of tuned in, I think I really got lost after about the fifth season, and then I just stopped watching it. And like I said, after the second or third season, I didn't watch it religiously, like when it would come out. Because I know the first two seasons when it came out, like every Sunday or whatever, whenever it was broadcasted, I watched it. It was that and Breaking Bad. Those were my two shows I loved. And it was a great franchise. I know it did really well in all kinds of aspects, but just for me, I
It's
think yeah.
Yeah, I was the same way as you. So I watched it. I didn't care for it as much. I started reading the comics, and
Uh-huh.
that's what got me more into it because
Uh-huh.
the comics, I always one, it's black and white. So you don't, it's really more scary, I guess is a good way to put it, because you don't know what's happening sometimes. Um, but not only that, it's more of an intriguing story.
Mhm.
Once you get into more of the story, because like John Bernthal's character, he's killed off pretty quickly. So, but you got to remember, that's a young John Bernthal. So he wasn't big yet. He was kind of a
Yeah.
side character. I feel like some of his first big roles was the Punisher, was things like that that got him more on the map to play
Yeah.
bigger.
Wolf of
Uh,
Wall Street.
yep, exactly. A couple other ones, Invincible. Invincible has become a very popular show on Amazon Prime, which follows the story of Mark Grayson. Which, yes, it is another superhero comic, but the difference is it's more brutality.
Hmm.
There is a lot of morals that you have to really learn. There's a lot of in-depth psychology that you have to understand with Mark and Omni-Man. Which, by the way, Omni-Man voiced by J.K. Simmons is amazing. I really enjoy J.K. Simmons in this role. He makes you understand Omni-Man more than you ever have. Sandra Oh plays Deborah Grayson. And by God, have we never, like, there's been characters we have seen very analytical thoughts of outside the superheroes or like people who support the heroes, like Lois Lane and stuff.
Hmm.
But this is really one of the first times in a show. Now, the comic's totally different in some aspects, but the show really does a good detail how Omni-Man's portrayal really affects her. And Sandra Oh is perfect for that role. She plays this role to the T. And this
Hmm.
is by far my favorite performance of hers. I think she's really good in this role as Mark's mom, as Omni Man's now ex wife. It shows you how strong of a woman Deborah is. And I think Sandra Oh is perfect. Um, let's talk about a couple more shows and we'll go into some of the other aspects. The Boys, another
Yeah.
show. Carl Urban. This is a very this is kind of shows you the darker side of the superhero community.
Yeah.
It's different aspects of that, and I think I really enjoy it. Um, the last one I want to bring up, Umbrella Academy. This is a big one on Netflix. A lot of people forget this is a comic. It is a comic. Yeah, this is one of them that I believe goes under the Vertigo title. Don't quote me on that.
Yeah.
But it's still a comic that people don't tend to put with a comic or a show that they don't put with a comic. And I think that's the whole purpose of independent comics. Like you said, there's a lot of them you didn't even know were comics.
Yeah. No, that's the thing is like I was just so intrigued. Like once I saw like I know I'll go back to Wanted. Like I was really, really blown away that that was a comic book movie. I'm like I would have never thought. I just
Like
thought it was like your typical action movie, that came out. And now that now that I find out that it is a comic book movie, it's like all the I was saying earlier too, and I don't mean to repeat myself, but it's like you see the different parts of that movie, and you're like, wow, it's very comic book esque. It has that feel to it that it is a comic book movie, and it just It all makes sense.
Right. You know, another one I want to bring up too here too, and I forgot to bring this up in the movies portion of it, was Snowpiercer.
Mhm.
Snowpiercer is a comic. It's a French comic.
Oh, we
It's La Trespensière Inge. Don't ever
say it
call.
with an accent.
I can't do that. And
Don't give up.
don't give up. Okay, John Cena over there. No, yeah, don't see me. But let's talk about this movie because this is another Chris Evans movie. This has Chris Evans, Ed Harris is in this film, Tilda Swinton, Jamie Bell. This movie, I'm looking it up right now to see how much this was, right? The budget for this film was about 39,200,000.
Okay.
Gross worldwide was 86 million. Again, not a movie, but I think that's the power of independent comic books. You don't have to have superheroes.
Yeah.
You don't have to follow the rules of a superhero, even if you do have a superhero comic that is outside that. You know, it's fun to watch them.
Mhm.
Fun to intrigue you into a story that doesn't have to have super or people in tights and capes, or it doesn't have to have a villain that has a diabolical plan. You know, like I guess a good way to do it too is there are comic book companies who focus on franchises.
Yeah.
So they have Transformers is a comic. Now it's owned by Image, but at the time of this recording, so if you're listening to it years in advance, it might be owned by somebody else. We don't know. But
Mhm.
IDW was a big publisher to that. TMNT is another big one. TMNT, a lot of people forget that is a Mirage Comics, and then it went to IDW. And another big one too, Star Trek started doing comics. You
Did
know,
they start as a comic or they started after the show?
it's more after the show.
Okay.
Most of
So,
what IDW has done, it's mostly after shows have started.
well, could that be the same thing with Star Wars, right? I know you have your
Yes.
own separate show for Star Wars and everything, but I
Yeah.
mean, the movies is what started it all, but now they have a very successful
Yeah.
comic line.
When
So,
Disney, yeah, when Disney bought Lucasfilm out and they already had Marvel, they made Marvel kind of like their headstone for comics.
mhm.
So most of the stuff, like you have some from Dark Horse and you have stuff from IDW, but that's it. And Marvel's like your head honcho, and that's what's made the lore so expanded. It's so great to see it. But going back to here, that's the whole purpose of this is to really show you that independent comic books. I'm going to put it out there, and this is going to be a bold statement for me. Independent comic books is what's going to save the comic book movie franchise. The
Yeah,
whole industry of the comic book movies are going to heavily rely on independent comics because people are losing faith in the hero community.
yeah.
People are getting tired of superhero movies.
Well, I think there needs to be more grittier, more realistic stories. Like nobody, I'm I love Iron Man. I love Spider-Man. I love Batman.
But everybody gets tired of seeing the same crap over and
There's a same trend, right? Like you're saying. I mean, it's like superhero, villain, superhero, villain,
yeah.
vigilante, villain. It's like I don't want to see that shit. I want to see something gritty. I want to see action. I want to see a little bit of violence.
Yeah,
And
I'm going to put it out there. I hope my co-host on the podcast for Comic Talkers, Mary, is listening because I'm going to put it out there. I do not want to see another Batman film. I'm putting it out there. I'm a big Batman fan. I'm wearing a Batman shirt now. I am a huge Batman fan. The problem with Batman films is that we just keep on telling the same crap.
Mhm.
Give other heroes a chance. Wonder Woman didn't even get a big screen appearance to 2017.
Yeah. Well, you could say the same thing with the repetitiveness with
Super,
Spider-Man.
yeah,
Like I love
Spider-Man,
Spider-Man.
yeah,
Like it's all the same. It's all the same stuff. Like I get it. It's a high school kid named Peter Parker. He gets, whatever powers, however it may be from a radioactive spider or some kind of chemical or anything like that. I get it. We get it.
but it's a whole thing of this is why I actually, and I know people are going to hate me for saying this. This is kind of why I liked what DCU was doing at points because you introduced Wonder Woman and she became a franchise hit. You had Shazam, who became another big franchise hit. Aquaman, When did we ever have an Aquaman movie? Not in my lifetime, other than until 2018. When DC started focusing on other heroes, that's when people went, hey, I want to watch this. Same thing with the MCU. You had Captain America, you had Thor, you had Iron Man. But then it was like, okay, they're getting up on their turns. What's going to happen after? And slowly and surely started introducing more heroes to start balancing, right? You had Falcon, who took up the Captain America mantle. You had Captain Marvel, even though I don't like her as much. But the point, you had characters willing to come up and step up. Make us care about these heroes. That's where Marvel lacks. They're pumping out too much. That's why I'm glad we're only really getting Deadpool this year. Because that's Deadpool, again, another great hit. I love Deadpool.
Well, I think too, and we won't stick too hard on Deadpool, but I will say for everything that they had released prior to Deadpool, Deadpool for me was a breath of fresh air.
Like,
We just didn't see. I think for me, when I first saw that, I was like, I love the comedy. I mean, I love how it's rated R, because Marvel just doesn't put out rated R stuff.
right.
But yeah, it's just Ryan Reynolds gives it that
But I'll put it out there. I feel like the peak of it all was 2017, 2018. That was the peak of superhero movies. You had Logan during that year. Those years. You had Black Panther come out during those years. You had Infinity War come out during those years.
You had Endgame come out in
Endgame came in 19 or 19. 2018 was Infinity War. 2019.
Was it? Okay, yeah. I knew it was like right in that 3-year span.
But you bring up it's the point. Those were your peaks. And what has it done after?
Yeah.
Like, you have good movies here and there. You had No Way Home.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic film. But the thing is that Marvel started going to shows to start introducing new characters. Why not the characters that we've seen? Like, we've gotten Falcon, we've got Winter Soldier, we've gotten some heroes, but okay, you have all this and it could be more. So let's do more. But see, this is why I say, and I go back to this. Same thing with Batman and Superman. It's the same story. I don't need to see this over and over and over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
Do something different. I don't care if Batman and Superman are the side characters. It's like thing like Star Wars.
Why can't we have a Robin movie?
Well, yeah, but see, it's the same thing. Like I said, so it's like Star Wars to me. When you introduced this new trilogy, I think it was kind of one of the dumbest decisions Star Wars did.
Mm-hmm.
There are people who love it. I love some of the movies of it. I liked 7th and at least 8th. I didn't like the 9th.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is that they should have been making movies like Rogue One or Solo or things like that. And those movies, they're all new characters. But you have those characters that kind of guide you on, right? You had Bail Organa in Rogue One. You had Princess Leia, right? You had C-3PO and R2 in little scenes, but they weren't the main characters. Do that with Batman and Superman. They don't have to be the main characters. Just make them prominent.
Yeah.
Just like I think I know people trash on this one. It's just like Black Adam, right? Black Adam at the end of the movie, Amanda Waller comes up on screen and pretty much says, "You lead these confines of conduct, I will attack you." And he goes, "Bring it." And she goes, "Well, I'm going to give you a sneak peek, and here comes Superman."
Yeah.
That fight? I don't know. Because Superman is permeable to magic. We know that. He's not the strongest when it comes to magic. But that's why I said, those are the things with Batman and Superman that I feel like, okay, you can put him as side characters. That's kind of why I liked what the MCU did with Spider-Man. They introduced him as a side character. They didn't just give him his own movie right away. Remember, he was introduced in Civil War. But going to independent comic books, this gives a different flavor. This gives a different taste to comic books. That comic book, like, okay, here's a good example. You didn't know Road to Perdition was a comic book.
Mm-mm. Not until I didn't even know really about the movie until you introduced me to it and we watched it together.
And it's a violent comic. It's a very action-packed comic. Those are movies that people don't think of. History of Violence is another big one.
Well, real quick with Road to Perdition, is it only like a one-issue comic? Like, is it?
It's a graphic novel, but there is one that happens prior. So it's like not prior, but like during their road trips and stuff. They did another story.
Okay.
And I've only read parts of it. I've never read it, but it's by the same writer, everything. And or Max Allan Collins is who writes the stories, and it's really good. What I've read of it, I enjoyed it, and but okay, History of Violence is another good one, right? History of Violence had Viggo Mortensen. Nobody even knew that was, and they were nominated for Academy Awards.
Mm-hmm.
Comic books doesn't have to be men in tights and a cape. Comic books can be anything you can think of. That's why I love independence more now since I started with Comic Talkers. And the reason is because there's a whole new world out there. Horror, westerns, adventures, even better superhero stories at points.
Mm-hmm.
Franchises that expand the lore. Transformers is one. Ninja Turtles is another. There's a lot. Even actors come to. Keanu Reeves just wrote one for Boom Studios called Berserker. Really good book. When you have celebrities come and do that, and you have these ideas, that's why a lot of people go to independents, because
Yeah.
independents, somebody like DC and Marvel's not going to take up your idea because they have their established worlds. You go to Image, they'll go, hey, and guess what? There's nothing connecting them all the time. They can make their own comics. There's
Mm-hmm.
no rules or no people saying you can't do that. Now, I want to ask this question too, because there are a lot of comic books in indies. There are books that we have not seen yet be brought to the big screen or even TV. Um, and some that we covered on Comic Talk. So if you guys want to go check them out, I'm going to reference a couple before. But Pat, if there are comics you've read or you've seen or you've even heard about,
Mm-hmm.
what are some comics that you go, why haven't they done something with them? And it could be anybody. It doesn't have to be indies. It could be normal comic book companies. Like the
I
big
can't.
two.
What's that again?
Or like the big two is what I mean by normal. It's like anything outside indies.
Of Marvel or DC? I couldn't think of like comic book lines because, like I said, I don't really read comic books too much. But what I was thinking of is more of like movies that they could make into comic books necessarily, which, there's certain, let's just say this. I would say there'd be maybe certain franchises of movies that can be comics. Like I love the Maze Runner movies. I
Yeah.
always thought that maybe putting those into a comic adaptation would be kind of cool. It feels like it could be in it, especially with all like the scenes that are involved and the scenery of everything of the world that they're involved in. Um, one thing I was thinking of too, and I know you're not a big fan of the show, but Game of Thrones. Uh,
Well, so to give you a little hint to that, they have adapted some of the stories, the books, into
mhm,
comic book adaptations.
okay,
There are graphic novels of the big books that George R. R. Martin created.
mhm,
So I'll stop you on that because there are some. You just have to
okay.
find. And they're usually in Barnes and Noble and stuff that they do like graphic novel adaptations of the story. So if you don't want to read all that mumbo jumbo, no,
Yeah.
I'm not a big Game of Thrones guy. You can watch.
And there's one more franchise of movies that I would love to see be brought in. Like I know they probably would never do it, but I really think the Die Hard movies could be easily a comic book line. John McClane, that's a badass character right there, man. And
Your
there's
name of the comic would be Yippee Ki Motherfucker.
well, like Die Hard with the Vengeance is one of my favorite action movies of all time. I just think there's just so much potential for stuff like that. But like you were saying, as far as like you know, different comic books that I'm surprised they haven't made a movie about. It's just, unfortunately, I'm just not too educated in that aspect to give you a good answer, if I'm being honest. But that's why I kind of turned it around and did it the opposite way.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, I think there's a lot of movie franchises that could be. I mean, like look at Star Wars. Look at what that's become.
Yeah, and but you gotta remember too, Star Wars is still under the big head honcho, like one of
Yeah.
the it's under Marvel. That's where most of their stuff comes in. But I got a few stories I'm gonna pitch to you. One's called Chew. Now, this I would pitch as a show because it's more of a mystery show. But pretty much it's about a cop by the name of Tony Chew. He has a secret. He has psychic impressions of whatever he eats. So, as a detective, if he chooses, like, say, if he gnaws on an arm or picks a piece of the victim's brain, he can know what happened.
Wait.
Literally, say if he's at a crime scene, somebody's dead laying there, and he chews or gnaws on something. You can get like psychic impressions to see what actually went down. It's kind of a weird story, but it's
very weird. Yeah.
I've read these comics. I really enjoy these comics. But this worked better as a show. This is not something I'd pitch in a movie for, because it's like your normal. I think of it as like Psych. You have those like just those fun episodes, or Monk, or a couple things like that. It's more that vibe. Okay. Here's one I took from my podcaster, Bryce, my fellow comic talker podcaster with me. We covered this story on the podcast God Country. God Country is a really good story. It will bring you to tears. Follows a guy by the name of Emmett, an old widower rattled by dementia. Is a tornado pretty much levels his home, and pretty much destroys most of West Texas. But an enchanted sword comes into his hands. So it's kind of like his second chance. But now he's got to go up against these threats that now come towards Earth because of what Emmett has. It's like gods and different things like that. Now he is the only one. So it's kind of that story of second chance, but letting go of the past, to let go of what's happening. This would be good stories for I know Bryce. I know it touched him a lot when we read it, and to have his history that it was really strong. It was a really good story, and I love it. Now, Once and Future is another big one. This is again another show I'd pitch. I would not pitch this because the show would be funny. A group of nationalists use an ancient artifact to bring a villain from Arthurian myth back from the dead to gain power. Ex-monster hunter Bridget McGuire, whose grandma, escapes her retirement home and pulls her unsuspecting grandson Duncan, a museum curator, into a world of magic and mysticism to defeat a legendary threat. This is a fun story. It's very dark, but the humor between Duncan and Bridget is just hilarious. Think of it, I look at it this way. Think of it as Ben Stiller and Robin Williams in Night at the Museum. Bridget is Robin Williams. Ben Stiller is Duncan. Duncan does not know anything what's going on, and Bridget's like, I got this. She's the Clint Eastwood of the story that would carry a shotgun outside or M1 Grand outside and shoot somebody. Duncan's like, oh no, we can't do that. Let's not do this, and he's the scaredy cat of the two. But it's a fun story. Now, another one I pitch is another one we covered, and it works better as a show. It's probably a 1 or 2 season show. I wouldn't go any further than that. It's called Folklords. The world of magic and monsters, Ansel is an outsider haunted by visions of the well-pressed suits and modern technology. When it comes to time to declare his quest, Ansel decides to seek out the mysterious Folklords, hoping that they can explain his visions. But looking for the Folklords is strictly forbidden, punishable by death.
Ooh.
Now, that is from the site of Boom Studios. Their synopsis of the story, because I was trying to write a synopsis and I couldn't do it because it's a very complex story. This is fairy tales. This takes that Brother Grimm fairy tales and brings them up. It's a horrid looking Hansel and Gretel. There are villains in this story. There is a lot of characters. Think about Once Upon a Time and how successful that show was, right?
Yeah.
Put it into a darker story. Something is killing the children is another one pitch. This is a show. This is a very mysterious story. I can't even talk about it without spoiling it. So I'm going to stay away from saying something about this story.
Mhm.
The last one's one of my personal favorites, and there was talks about a show, but I could actually see it being made into like a series of movies too. Six Gun. This is a Western horror story. You
Hmm.
wouldn't think it's horror, but pretty much these six guns are enchanted and has special powers. Whoever wields the gun is wielded to that, has to hold that gun pretty much till they die. If somebody else even picks it up, could burn them, could do a lot of things. Till that person is dead, they cannot do it. Well, it comes into a hand of a young woman after her father or grandfather, I can't remember, it's been a while, loses his life. And when she wielded it to shoot at her enemies, she is now the sole protector of the gun.
Gotcha.
If all six guns are foreign, it will allow the devil to walk and pretty much conquer the earth.
Hmm.
So it's a fun story. The art is amazing. I do see this being made into a show or a movie. I'd see more of a movie because each story is kind of it's like itself, like so like contained story a little bit, and then it's still
Yeah.
new, but every story really can be its own movie. So I really enjoy it. There's this just shows you the range of independent comics and why independent comic books, films, or shows are going to run the comic book movie or show industry from here on out. We don't get those, we're not going to get anything else because we already know MCU is dying down. Deadpool is really going to speak volumes. And two, we know DC doesn't have a good track record either. James Gunn is now coming into the picture and now changing things up, but that doesn't always mean it's going to look good. So there's our way of thinking is now how can independent comic book films come in? Because another big one we didn't talk about, but it was kind of a flop, is Spawn.
Yeah.
It was the very first big independent comic book film to ever get a release like that. Well,
Mhm.
Men in Black was big, but nobody was like predicting it. And same thing, Spawn came out and wasn't really well received. And now there's been talks about another Spawn for years. I think it was Jamie Foxx attached to it, and nothing's come out of it. Spawn's a big character in the independent comic book world. One of my favorite comic book characters. But we haven't seen much with him with the movie side.
Only
And
time will tell.
I like the show more. I think
Yeah.
Keith David is the guy who voices Spawn.
Keith David. I love Keith David, man. He's
He
great.
is amazing in that show.
He's got an iconic voice.
Yeah.
He does a lot of narrating.
Well, I love him. I know a lot of people don't like it. I like him in Princess and the Frog. He is the main villain in that film.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, yeah.
Mhm. And then you hear him, and then you hear him in Spawn, and Spawn is just so dark, and it makes you love Spawn. With his voice, and he's in Gargoyles. He's in a lot of stuff.
Gargoyles.
But the point is that comic book films need a really. We went over pricing with you and the budgets and stuff because these movies were profitable. These
Mhm.
movies do have a following. So why not do more with independent comic books? I feel that it is a way that can not only expand on the comic book world, but allow others to see it, and vice versa. Because, like we said, Transformers was expanded on in IDW
Mhm.
and really made a lore outside the Civil War that we know and love with the Autobots and the Decepticons. Same thing with G.I. Joe. G.I. Joe started off with toys and shows, and now they have their own comic book series. It can go both ways. Like we said, Star Wars is another big one. There's a lot of things that come out of this that show that independent comic book films really can be profitable and really show you what it's made of, and really can go up there against some of the big titans that we know. Marvel and DC, sorry, but you're gonna have to start watching your back a little bit more.
You
This is
better watch your back.
good three.
Because I reckon there's a new sheriff in town. Do.
But but what's in this out? Because I think it's a good way to end it out. But you have anything else to say about independent comic book films
No,
before?
I just think I think everyone should go check them out. Do your go look up online, look at the list. Like I'm sure there's a few that me and Brandon did miss talking about,
Yeah.
but you will be very surprised to see what is out there and what is a comic book movie. Like again, Men in Black, I went probably my whole life without knowing it until about a year ago. that it was a comic book movie, and I was blown away. The Mask, Wanted, um,
And
Hellboy.
Two Guns is another good one. Two Guns, people
Yeah.
forget it's a comic book. It is.
I think you need to broaden your horizons a little bit with when it comes to the comic book movies. So no, this was great, man. I had a good time. This was a topic that I think needed to be discussed. So I'm glad we did it.
And you know what? Guys might think it was boring in the beginning. The purpose was, like I said, purpose of that was to show you that these movies are profitable. There is something that can come out of these. And there are a lot of comic books. That's why we pitched a few of them to you that really could be made into shows or movies and would show that much more success.
Yep.
So, fans, check us out, J4F Podcast at Instagram, TikTok. Check us out on Spotify. And without further ado, turn it back over to Patty B to take us out.
Yeah, thank you guys for everything. Thank you again for expanding your horizons with us this evening. And remember, we do it just for flicks. Good night, everyone.